Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm filming my August TBR. So I don't typically do TBRs regularly. I really like just going with a vibe and mood reading. I'm a big mood reader, but for the past few months I have been mood reading and just picking up whatever I feel like, and right now I feel like I need a little more structure in my life, and that includes structure in my reading, so I thought I'd put together a TBR. I've separated this TBR in two sections, but I also wanted to include some challenges that I want to do for myself until the end of the year. Some of these challenges, maybe if they go well, I'll be able to continue them next year, but I have 3 challenges that I want to focus on per month. So starting with those challenges, I want to read at least one nonfiction book a month. I used to read a lot of nonfiction because of like school when I was in university, but university totally like killed any kind of drive I had to read nonfiction. It really kind of just sucks the soul out of you, but I kind of want to get back into it. I want to like critically analyze and take in new information in like a different perspective. I typically like to read historical nonfiction and anthropological nonfiction because that's what I studied in school, but I am open to like a lot of things. In August, I think I'm going to start off with something simple and something low-key for my first nonfiction. And so with that in mind, I'm picking up The Motorcycle Diaries by Che Guevara. If you don't know who Che Guevara is, he is a Argentinian revolutionary. He's most known for his participation in the Cuban Revolution, helping overthrow the Batista government. He was eventually killed by, I believe, Bolivian forces on the orders of Washington, and if that still doesn't ring a bell, I'm going to put in an image that he's like most associated with, the Viva la Revolucion image. Fun fact, one of my favorite like instances of seeing this image like in our pop culture is an old Disney movie called Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen with Lindsay Lohan, and in this one scene she's like wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt, which I just think it's really funny that Disney produced a movie and had one of their young actresses wearing like a Marxist t-shirt, knowing that Disney is like a prime example of like capitalism. I just think it's really funny. Anyways, but before Che Guevara became who he was and before he like solidified his legacy, he was a like med student, I believe, in Argentina, and he went on a road trip throughout Latin America. And during his road trip throughout South America, he witnessed a lot of things that really helped form his like political ideology, specifically the mistreatment of like Latin Americans by certain governments, by certain corporations, US corporations mostly. His like journey and his formation to becoming who he was, and throughout this whole trip he actually documented it. So these are his writings. I do believe at some point as he got older he did like edit his journals and was eventually published, which is what this is, and it was adapted into a film, which I enjoyed. So another challenge that I want to complete every month is to read at least one classic a month. I don't want to read a classic just because it has the label of this is a classic. I do still want to read things that are within like my comfort, like my wheelhouse, so like still fantasy, still sci-fi. So I'm assuming most of the things I'll read will be like modern classics. So I have some choices that I'm thinking about. I have a little classic shelf, but these are the ones that are like calling my name. I have a few books from H.G. Wells. I have The War of the Worlds, which I've been wanting to read for a long time. One of the classes I took when I was a university student was like 19th century history, and one of the things we talked about was this like growing vibe, this growing feeling of like restlessness towards the turn of the century. This is before World War I. People were getting really antsy, and just like a lot of kind of work like this was coming out, which I think is really interesting. So this is something that I'm interested in. It's sci-fi. I'm really feeling sci-fi right now. I also have The Time Machine. I hate this copy, by the way, but this is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I have also been wanting to try Jane Austen. I've never read Jane Austen, and I know like Pride and Prejudice is like her bag, like that's the gig, that's her, like that's the blueprint. So I can pick this up. This is the Arcturus like editions. I could pick up this because again it's a staple, but I've also been wanting to read Mansfield Park, which is not as hyped up as Pride and Prejudice, but I have seen the film adaptation and I really enjoyed that. So this is also something that's on my radar. Let me know like your thoughts. So one challenge I also have for myself is a comfort reread. I mostly reread books because I want to continue a series, but then I forget what happens in a series because it takes me so long to like continue on. So I most of the time just end up starting the series all over again. So that's usually the type of rereads I do. I don't usually do rereads of like, I really enjoyed this, it made me feel good, so let me reread it. I don't get to do that a lot. So that's what I want to do once a month. And the reason why I put this challenge in is because, for one, I want to reread more. That's a big reason why I buy books and then keep them, because at some point maybe I want to do a reread, whatever. But also, recently this past month in July, my best friend slash chihuahua that I've had since before I was a teenager, she passed away. And I got really emotional, obviously, as one would, and I was really down, and I just needed things to make me feel better. I'm a little bit better now. I'm still kind of sad sometimes, but, you know, I just need things to make me feel good, and that was the inspiration for this challenge. So I have 2 books that would fit this category, and the first book is probably the one that I'm going to read, because this is like my ultimate feel-good book. I've read this book like 10 times already, and that book is Blood and Chocolate by Annette Klause. I read this book originally way back when I was in my like Twilight era. I wanted all of that teenage like paranormal supernatural romance, and when I picked this up, it like totally changed the game for me. Like Twilight was over and I was all about this book, which is interesting because this was published quite a bit before Twilight. This is a 1998-97 published originally. In this book we follow a young werewolf girl, which I thought was like so interesting and so unique, was because we follow like the monster. Our main character is named Vivian. I think she's like 16 years old. She's a werewolf, and at the beginning of the book her father passes away, and because of a series of events her pack has to move from a more like rural like area to a more suburban populated area. So they're around more like humans, and they can't really be themselves. They're kind of like more withdrawn, I suppose, from their like werewolf self. And our main character Vivian has never felt comfortable with humans because, you know, she's a werewolf. She's not, why would she be? But she's also not comfortable with her pack because of some things that happen at the beginning of the book. So she feels really isolated from everyone. And so when she moves to this new town, she goes to this new high school, she meets a boy that's like really nice and kind to her, and she kind of feels that maybe she can be like her 100% true, authentic self, so on and so forth. It's a teen romance. You kind of know where this is going. Looking back at it now, I definitely don't think something like this would be well received. There are definitely some things here that are like problematic, I suppose. It definitely doesn't end the way that most teen romances would end. I like randomly checked reviews once upon a time somewhat recently, and I kind of realized that yeah, this probably like is not an ending that most people would like. Also, there is an age gap here between 2 characters. The young woman is like 16, and then there's another character who's like 20 something, which nowadays would not like fly. But I don't know what it was that I read this at the right time, in the right headspace, like the perfect moment, like stars aligned, and I like fell in love. And this is like one of the books that makes me feel happy, I guess. I also really enjoyed how this character was pretty much like a huge bitch, like unapologetically. Like she was kind of mean sometimes, which I don't blame her for being mean. I think teenage girls should be more mean, and I'm pretty sure I was just like really fed up with like the nice, young, innocent, like unassuming like main characters that we'd been seeing a lot in like teenage supernatural paranormal romances. So this is probably going to be my comfort reread for the month. But if I don't pick this up, which I probably will, but just in case, I do have a backup, and that is The Goose Girl by Shannon Hale. I read this my last year of university, and I read it right before the semester started, and I guess that really kind of like hit me like in the right moment. I read this in the right moment, I guess. So this is the first book in the Books of Bayern series, which I don't think you have to read all of them. I think they're all companion novels that kind of like take place in the same time, same area. But this is a fantasy novel that is honestly like so cozy and like quaint. I just felt really good reading this for the first time. In this book we follow a crown princess. I believe she's being wedded off to a prince from a neighboring kingdom, and while she's like on the journey to go meet her future husband or whatever, a few people like secretly overthrow her. They basically like try to kill her and like take her place and like pretend that someone else is the crown princess. This whole like maneuvering thing, so she's kind of like on the run for the most of the book. So those are pretty much the challenges that I want to keep for this month. So for the rest of the TBR video, I'm gonna like group up books by sections. So this next section are books that I would need to finish a series. I try to finish as much series as possible so I don't like get like backed up. So I have a few books here. I have Shadow Scale by Rachel Hartman. This is the second book in the Serafina duology. In this book we follow a court musician, and she kind of gets involved in this plot, this mystery where the crown prince has been murdered, and most of the humans think someone within the dragon community had some part in it. The dragons in this world are a little different than your normal like mythical dragons. It's a lot of like political intrigue. I didn't love the first book, but I was interested in it to see like what happens next. It's a duology, so I would be done with it pretty quickly. I have that if I want to finish that series. Another duology I could finish is the Monsters of Verity series by Victoria Schwab. This is a really popular YA series. The first book in the series had a lot of highs and lows, but I do want to continue it again to see what happens. I did really like the world, the concept, and like one of the main characters, August, here is so sweet and kind, and I really just like vibed with his character. On the flip side, I didn't really like Victoria Schwab's storytelling, and I really hated one of our other main characters, Kate, who is a kind of like not like other girls, like to the extreme in my opinion. So I'm going to continue it now that I know like what the plot is, because it was kind of like confusing as to where the story was going in the first book. But now that I know what's going on, I think this will flow better, and I'm hoping to like this more than the first book in the series. And if you don't know what this story is about, this takes place in a city where the crimes that you can commit, the more serious crimes that a person can commit, creates monsters, like actual physical monsters, which I think is really cool. Another series that I could finish this month would be the Old Kingdom series by Garth Nix. The first two books in the series are Sabriel and Lirael, and the last book in this original trilogy, I think he's written more within this universe, but I think the original three concludes with Abhorsen. This is a really well-loved series, and for me, most of the series has been like The first book I thought was pretty decent. The second book kind of let me down in some parts. It just didn't live up to the hype in my opinion, but there are some necromancers, there are some like prophet seer-esque type characters that I think are really interesting. Not a lot of political intrigue, but there is like a kind of brewing like evil that needs to be like taken down type of plot going on here. So I definitely can finish the series. It's not, the book itself is not very long. The second book was like really long compared to the others. I could finish this trilogy. Saved it. So 2 more books in this section. Another series that I can finish, I don't have this physical copy, is Empire of Empty Wars. This is the 3rd and final book in the Serpents and Kings trilogy by S.M. Gaither. I talked about the series a lot a few months ago, but I kind of haven't mentioned it in a while. This is a Kindle Unlimited fantasy series. So this series is a kind of like fantasy palette cleanser for me. There's a lot of tropes that we've seen before and nothing like groundbreaking or new. The writing itself isn't like different or dynamic. It's a 3-star series that I enjoy reading. I don't have to love every book I read. In this series we follow a young girl named Alaya, and she is part of the Serpent Clan. Almost every person in this world is part of a clan. Each clan has like special, unique, magical abilities that are unique to each clan. The Serpent Clan, however, has all mostly been wiped out because of they were kind of doing some funny stuff with the magic that they had. We also have a kind of like mad emperor type character who needs to be removed. There's a rebellion brewing. Again, kind of typical. We've seen this before in fantasy, nothing new, but I still kind of enjoy the series, and I do want to know. Again, I just want to know what happens next. I'm a completionist. I don't like not finishing things. And the last book I don't have a physical copy for, but this is probably my most anticipated series finale so far, and that is The Crimson Crown by Cinda Williams Chima. This is the last book in the 7 Realms series. I'm really anxious to see what happens because I know there's a sequel series. The sequel series is called Shattered Realms, and I don't know what that means for the 7 Realms series. I don't know, but this series is like has been like my highlight, one of my highlights for this year. This series has everything that I love: interesting characters, interesting story, political intrigue. This series basically like hit a lot of right notes for me. I adore it. It is well loved, but it's not like talked about a lot. I really enjoy it. I mentioned the series so many times in the last few videos, so feel free to watch any of them to like get a summary. So those are some series that I could finish this month. So this next section are books in a series. I'm not quite at the end, so it wouldn't be like finishing a series. I'm just continuing some series. One that I'm probably gonna pick up this next month is The Son of Neptune by Riordan. This is the second book in the Heroes of Olympus series, which is the follow-up to the Percy Jackson series. Don't really have to go into detail. Everyone kind of knows what this series is about. I never finished this series. I have read the first 2 books before, so this is technically a reread. Yeah, and I just want to like continue on, complete it. I know this is a really hyped up series, and it definitely, in my opinion, lives up to the hype. I'm just really excited to continue on. I do want to at least read 1 middle grade a month, so this would probably be that. The next book is The Empress by S.J. Kincaid. The first book in the series is The Diabolic, which kind of like took my breath away. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. This is a YA sci-fi series that in the first book we follow a diabolic named Nemesis, and diabolics are essentially like these genetically altered superhumans, kind of Terminator-esque, and their purpose in life is to protect one specific individual. And our main character, Nemesis, is tasked to protect the daughter of a kind of disliked senator. He's disliked for some of his political opinions, and in the first book, the senator basically pisses off the galactic emperor, and the emperor basically asks the senator to send him his daughter as like a political prisoner. The senator's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to send the diabolic Nemesis in her place. In this world, most people get like cosmetic surgeries like on a whim. It's that kind of sci-fi fantasy setting, and so they sent Nemesis in her place to like pretend to not only be human, which diabolics don't act like normal humans, and also pretend to be like a scared human. So it's really interesting. It's very much Terminator meets Game of Thrones. You have some eccentric characters that you see a lot in like sci-fi stories. Again, writing wise, nothing fantastic out of this world, but I got really invested in the story really quickly. This series made me want to pick up more sci-fi. I'm in a sci-fi kick right now, so I could also continue with A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This is the second book in the Ember and the Ashes series. Really well loved series. This is a YA fantasy where you follow a few people working against a Roman inspired empire that treats its people pretty badly. We follow 2 characters, Laia and Elias. Laia is pretending to be a slave to a pretty important member of this empire in order to get information. She could be killed for her actions. And then we also follow Elias, who is a like soldier in training for this empire, and he's really good. Like, he's a really good soldier. He has like a bright future ahead of him, but he has like no interest in perpetuating any of the empire's like pretty shitty behavior, so he could be killed for his like beliefs. I'm really nervous to see what happens. I know that the author is like pretty comfortable killing off characters from what I've heard, so I could also pick up Fire Touch by Patricia Briggs. This is the next book that I'm on for the Mercy Thompson series. This is a very like delectable urban fantasy, kind of similar in the vein of the Sookie Stackhouse True Blood novels, Harry Dresden novels as well, that kind of urban fantasy. In this world, we follow Mercy Thompson, who is a mechanic. She's also a shapeshifter. She can turn to a coyote whenever she wants to. She gets involved in a lot of like supernatural drama with like fae and werewolves and vampires. She also like lives kind of next door to the alpha of a werewolf pack, so there's some stuff going on there. But yeah, this is a really just like fun series that I love listening. I mostly listen to this on audiobook, but since I haven't been in an audiobook mood, I'm probably gonna get an ebook from my library, and I usually get through these pretty quickly. Again, they're an urban fantasy, very like fast paced and like just delicious. I also could pick up Gleam by, I think the author's name is Raven Kennedy. This is a Kindle Unlimited series. It is a King Midas retelling. This is the 3rd book in the Plated Prisoner series. In this book, we follow a young woman who's basically King Midas's like number one possession. Everyone knows her as like his most precious object. I would say this is very much like a fantasy romance. It's definitely adult. There's a lot of triggers that you might want to read up on before you might want to pick up the series, but throughout the series she basically starts realizing that maybe the love that she has for King Midas and the love that she thinks he has for her is not super healthy. So yeah, it's a lot of like self-liberation stuff going on here, at least in the first two books. I think this might be a 4-book series, and this would be book number 3. I've never really read a King Midas retelling before, I think, and I'm really enjoying this one. The next section would be book series that I want to start. Ironically, these would all be rereads because, again, I start a series and then I don't pick it up for years, and then when I want to continue on, I don't remember anything, so I have to reread the first book. So these are all rereads, but they're all completed, so I have like no excuse to like not continue on. The first book would be The Kiss of Deception. This is the first book in the Remnant Chronicles by Mary Pearson. I thought this first book in this fantasy romance series was like really good. Our main character Laya is a crown princess, and by tradition she's going to marry a prince for political marriage, and she doesn't want that, so she runs away. And throughout the book we follow the perspective of 2 men as well as Laya's. We follow 2 perspectives of 2 men who, one is a bounty hunter that her father hired, I think, to go find her, and then we also follow the perspective of the prince who she basically like ran away from and didn't want to marry. And we don't know who's who. We do meet both of them, but we don't know who's the prince and like who's like the hunter hunting her. And I really liked this first book. It was so good, and I never continued on. I do think the series is pretty well respected for the most part, so definitely want to continue this one if I'm still in like a fantasy romance mood. The next series that I could continue or start would be Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton. I don't know if this series has a name, but in the series we follow a young woman named Amani who's a like gunslinger. She has like really good aim. This is kind of like a kind of desert fantasy. Her like number one goal in life is to basically escape this like really small town that she's not comfortable living in. She doesn't really have a lot of prospects, and she just wants to like leave as soon as she can. She meets a very interesting figure one night, and they basically ride off, and she's on this new adventure exploring her like the empire that she grew up in, and she basically like sees a world that she thought she knew from a different perspective. Really interesting. There's a little bit of romance, a little bit of a rebellion going on. I also do want to read like more like desert setting fantasies, so we have this one. And then I also have Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I read this, adored it. So this is a adult sci-fi series. This series takes place in like the far future, I want to say, and our main character Darrow is a miner on Mars, if I remember correctly, and they're mining carbon or something, and Darrow and his people and the generations before him have basically been told their entire lives that these sacrifices that they're making mining carbon on Mars, while it is dangerous, mining in general is a very dangerous job, that it's a sacrifice worth making for future generations to hopefully like populate the surface of Mars and maybe other moons or planets or whatever. And then Darrow finds out that that is basically a big fat lie, and Darrow basically becomes part of this like very silent rebellion. It's like one of my favorite forms of rebellion, where it's like a quiet infiltration. It's not this outright like we're gonna like march at dawn type of thing. It's very like I'm gonna infiltrate this very corrupt system. That's at least the vibe I'm getting, that he's gonna like infiltrate and try to like take down this system from like the top down. I don't know if that happens in the end, but that's like the vibe that I got from the first book. Again, it would be a reread. I also want to emphasize like maybe reading some more adult fantasy. I do read a lot of YA, high fantasy, not a lot of adult high fantasy. So there are 2 things that I am looking at. The first book isn't like adult in terms of like content. For the most part, I assume that this author doesn't write a lot of like grittiness, but this typically falls into adult, though I've heard some people say that it's easily also passable for YA. I'm not totally sure. I obviously don't know because I haven't read this book, but that is Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I mean, I don't really have to like talk about this at length, right? This is probably like one of the more popular authors writing today in terms of fantasy. I don't know much about the actual story. I do know that this magic system is based on like ingesting metals, and this takes place in a world where like the evil emperor, warlord, or whatever you want to call him, like won, and this takes place like 1,000 years after his like victory. And I'm assuming that the world that the people live in is pretty shitty. So yeah, that's all I know. Really well loved series. Yeah. And the next book is kind of ambitious. I don't know how I'm going to feel about this book, but it is being adapted soon, and it is really well loved. And yeah, and that is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Yeah, I don't know what the story's about. It's like a 15-book series. In theory, I love that, because the more the merrier for me. I love getting more content from worlds that I love. So if I do love this world and this story and these characters, then like I'm obviously winning. But again, what if I don't, you know? While I don't know like the plot of this series overall, I heard some tidbits, some character tropes, elements that have called my attention. I'm almost done. 2 more things that I want to address. On my paper here, I have notes that I'm looking at every now and then, and on my paper I have Ice Planet Barbarians. Just one more book. I have been reading the Ice Planet Barbarian series by Ruby Dixon for the last month or so, and I picked up like a lot of the books. Like I am like 10-11 books in right now. I've been obsessed with them. Yes, they're really like campy and ridiculous, but I've just been like blowing through these, and it's really affected my reading. So I literally put just read one book. I don't have to read 5 or 6 like I have been. Just read one. So I'm essentially limiting myself here, because I don't want to just like read Ice Planet Barbarians, even though I do want to just read Ice Planet Barbarians, but like I also want to like vary my reading. In the series, we follow a group of human women that get abducted from Earth, and they kind of crash land on this very icy planet. And on this planet there is a group of alien species. They're not really aliens, because that's kind of their planet, whatever. And they basically fall in love. It's just like a really smutty alien sci-fi romance series, and that's essentially what I came to the series for. I just wanted a cheesy, like ridiculous good time, some romance, so on. But I am really surprised at some of the content that are within this books. Of course, there's also like smutty, like erotica scenes, but the author is like doing a really good job at like creating, not necessarily like diversity in terms of like diversity, but like trying to make each of these women distinct, and their romances and their histories different from one another. With the first few books in the series, I'll talk about this in my wrap up, but with the first few books in the series, you know, it's really, again, like just cheesy whatever romance. But as the series have progressed, the author has been like addressing and like including more like elements in her stories that I wouldn't have expected her to in these really short books. Like we have a character here, like for example, there's one character that we've read so far that she, you know, is deaf, and she had her implant removed when she was abducted, so that's been a struggle for her. We've also had characters who are dealing with a lot of like trauma, emotional issues. And without getting into too much detail, like sometimes I read these books and I'm like, you know what, the feminism is leaving my body, like I know. But then there are also moments within this series that I'm reading and I'm like, but hold on, I think Ruby Dixon is saying something here that we're kind of just glossing over because these books are again ridiculous. It's really interesting, this series, but for the most part, yeah, I'm reading them for like fun entertainment purposes. But yeah, I think the next book in this series would be Barbarian's Choice, and this is Farley's story, and she was like the youngest female alien in this group, and now she's all grown up. So that's the one book that I'm gonna have to like limit myself for this month within this series. And then the last thing on my TBR is like any mystery thriller. I'm thinking maybe like YA mystery thriller, because those are actually like really, I don't know, they're really good sometimes. But also maybe a Karen Slaughter book. I haven't read a Karen Slaughter in a while, but I think I want to pick up the next book in the Grant County series. I think that's a series I started. Yeah, her writing is so addicting to me. Her stories are so addicting. There are a lot of like trigger warnings for each book that sometimes like I think I have a high tolerance for certain content, but sometimes like Karen Slaughter will put something in a book and I'm kind of just like, hold on, I need to take a breath because it's too much for me. So yeah, that's the last thing on this TBR. I mostly gave choices or like options for myself because while I do want some structure, I also do want to have a little bit of free range with my reading. But yeah, those are all the books that I'm looking at to read in the month of August. I definitely don't think I'm going to read all of them. Again, a lot of choices here for myself to give myself some like wiggle room. But yeah, let me know if you've read any of these, if you are interested in reading any of these. I'd like to hear anything you have to say in the comments down below. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, or not, whatever, it's all cool with me. I'll link all my socials down below, as well as some far more important links. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out. I don't think this is gonna fit in a thumbnail, so it's just period.